Thank you very much, Shakila. That's a wonderful introduction. And I'd like to just start off by thanking everybody who's taken the time off on a Friday afternoon. I know our Fridays are very, very precious. To say thank you for joining us this afternoon on a subject that is really not well researched and written about in the literature. And so while there is a little bit, a lot of what I'm going to say is going to be coming from my experience and from what I have done in working with the older children. So I really do hope that it's going to be a very worthwhile afternoon for you. And so the subject is, yes, everybody can learn to read, and it's the literacy instruction for the older students. And so I'd like to sort of start off by saying that I had the absolute privilege of working next door for many, many months, next door to Lyle Lloyd when he would come to the Center for AAC in the early 2000s. And a lot of you will know him from Lyle Lloyd and Arvidsson. He wrote, sort of amazing, amazing books. And he was also the founding editor, one of the very first editors of the AAC Journal. So, and when I was studying and doing my honors and attended some of his lectures, he said, one must always declare one's bias. And so I need to declare my bias in the next slide, which I will. And part of the bias is when I've really thought into this very, very deeply. Prof. Dada had said to me some time ago, we were talking about reading, and she said to me, but Maureen, why is it that you are so successful with the children and young adults that you work with? And I said to her, basically there's three things that I do in my half hour in my sessions, because we have half-hour sessions. And I said, I do this, and I do this, which I'm going to tell you about today. And she said, I don't think so. I think something else, that if I videoed you, I would find something that you do that you are not aware of that makes you a successful teacher of reading. And one of the things is that we as successful teachers, we always need to be very reflective of what we're doing and how we're doing it. And it got me really, really thinking deeply, because why is it that I think that I'm doing these three things? I've been doing it for so long. I think I do have a talent for teaching, but what is it? Because there's many other people who also have real good talents for teachers that are excellent teachers as well. But I think that for me, when a child comes to me, there isn't a fiber in my being that doesn't believe that the child's able to learn to read. I believe 100% that this child or this adult, no matter who they are, I believe that we can move them along that literacy continuum. And so while we know that reading is really a very complex task, especially for adults, we know that everybody can move along the literacy continuum. That is what they want. Okay, if they come because mommy said that they must come, or the school says they've got to come and they really don't want to learn to read, well, that's something else. But if they want, and if they have the time to dedicate to the process, because it's not it doesn't just take a couple of hours, it doesn't just take 1 year, it's going to take a lot of time to become a fluent reader. So we've got to know that that we do have that time. And I absolutely believe in that nobody is too anything. You can't be too blind, you can't be too deaf, you can't be too disabled, you can't be too anything to be denied our very, very best teaching strategies. And so that is my bias, and what I truly believe. And so we do know that reading and writing, they are cognitive activities, but they're embedded in the social and linguistic concepts, and consequently are influenced greatly by both contexts. And so we've got to bear that in mind when we are working with the population that we are working with. Okay, so what we do find is that we find that in the field that we're working in, that we find that the children or young adults, they have language issues and language challenges that we know impact as well on the acquisition of literacy. So if I have a look here and I look at the language difficulties, we know that with our population, particularly they have problems with the speech acts because they have complex communication needs. We know that they have the problems with the grammar or the syntax, the pragmatic skills, when to, sort of communicate what to whom. We know that very often they have problem with the phonology, the sounds. We have problems also with the understanding of the language, and then the morphology. We understand that hearing those like sort of the short parts of the words that change meanings can also be quite difficult. And speech therapists who are working with children will find that, as would educators working with our language and communication within the national curriculum statement, we find that to be true as well. So to bear that in mind as we go through our process is very, very important. So I think that what we need to ponder, and I think we really need to think about this very, very carefully, is that if we teach literacy skills in the same way that we always have, we're going to get the same results that we've always have achieved. And that's true. So if we've been successful and we continue to teach in the way that we are teaching, we will continue to be successful. But if we haven't had the same level of success, it's time for us to take a step back and say, what can I do differently? And maybe there's something that I can share with you today that that you can say, okay, you know what? That's something that I know, and I used to do, but I actually haven't done it for a long time. And I'll be quite excited to go back to my children in the classroom, my older child, my a child that I'm seeing privately, or a young adult, and I might change some things. So what we do know is that about 90% of people who use AAC experience difficulties with reading. And we know that 14% of all adults about worldwide experience problems with basic readings, and 29% of all adults experience difficulty with more complex reading texts. So we know that reading, while we are all wired for reading, we do know that there are people who have difficulty with reading. And I think that this is true when we're talking about Thorstad. He suggests that we need to really reflect on what we do as educators and teachers of reading, whether you are an OT who's teaching reading, or a speech therapist, or a teacher, or a mum, or a sibling. We need to sort of think very carefully about how we are going about this.
Sorry, Maureen.
So I think that yes.
Perhaps it might be helpful if you switched off your video, simply because I see the strength of your signal is not as good. So perhaps that would help. Thank you so much, Maureen.
Perfect. Okay. So I think that the reading difficulties in people who have cerebral palsy are positively correlated with the degree of speech impairment and physical disability. And a lot of us are working with children and young adults with cerebral palsy. And it doesn't talk about then different diagnoses that also have speech impairments, but I think that would be true as well. So I think that's what we need to bear in mind. And I kind of have got the most recent stats from South Africa, from the Department of Higher Education and Training. And basically, we know as of 2021, this was published in 2022, that 3.7 million South African adults are illiterate. Sorry, this is from 2020, published in 2022. And they got this figure from who had not yet completed grade 7 or the ABET, the Adult Education and Training Level 3. So it does mean that we do have a fair amount, a big percentage. It's about, if we want to say 48 million, we're about maybe about 7% of our population is unable to read. So that's something to bear in mind. So very often we see and we read the text and we sort of see, particularly, the research like Norton, will say, AAC facilitates illiteracy, and we might see this coming up and up again in articles. So then we've got to say to ourselves, well, if AAC facilitates literacy, why is it that so many AAC adults, children as well, who use AAC are non-readers? And to unpack that. And I think mainly it's because they have not yet been taught in a way that's meaningful to them. And that is, we haven't found the way to come in and to address them where they are at and to deal with them with reading. So I think something to consider is, this isn't a new meme. We would have seen this on Facebook and Instagram, and where people put up, sort of little memes. But I think it's very important. When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. And we, as the teachers and educators, we form part of that environment. And therefore, as forming part of the environment, we need to look very carefully at what we are doing. I really like this one. It's never too late to have a literate childhood. And that should be our new mantra going forward from now. So what I want us to do now, just take 1 minute. And I want you to think back to how you learned to read. And I want you to think about, when did you learn to read? Did you learn to read before you attended school? Did you learn to read in grade 1? Were you a late bloomer? How did you learn to read? Were you, what kind of books did you learn to read when you were first introduced to reading? Were you taught just like the sounds and how to put them together, or did you have flashcards, or did you learn by reading scripts, or did you learn by somebody reading it out aloud and pointing to the words? Just think about that. And I want you also just to think of whether that reading experience was good for you. And if you look down on the right side of the page, you can see a little speech bubble. And if you feel you would like to answer some of those questions in the speech bubble, please do. If you don't want to do it, that's also fine. But I'm just going to give you literally 1 minute just to think about this very carefully, so that when we go forward, we can refer back to some of the ways that you learned to read, and we can sort of hook some of the information that I'm telling you now back onto your previous experiences. Thank you. I see flashcards. Sound associators. Going to read at school. Lots of oral stories. Worksheets to color, bedtime stories, nursery rhymes and preschool storybooks, yes. We are at the library. Phonics and sounds, visual prompts, phonics and literature, from Fundal into preschool. Kathy and Mark. Phonics. Corin, you learned in sub A. Stephanie, matching words. Okay, thank you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just have a look at some of the reading, some reading models, and we're going to sort of look at some of the models that we do come across going forward. So this is the model Ari. I really do like Ari's writing, and if you do get hold of some of his writing, those who are studying and looking to learn more about reading, I really do like what he has to say. He talks about the developmental model of reading. So basically, he has 4 phases. You have the logographic phase. That's when you just can recognize logo. So you know what it's like. You've going out in the car to visit Granny, or you're going on the train somewhere, and the kids have all eaten breakfast, a hearty breakfast, and you drive past McDonald's and they say, "Mommy, I'm hungry." They're not reading McDonald's, but they are reading the logo of McDonald's, and they know what it says. So it's the same as like if they go and they're just looking at the spine of books in the bookshelf, and they see a little picture or a color, and they know that that's that book. They're reading just the logo, the picture. And then we move into what we call the transitional phase, and that's when they start seeing 1 or 2 salient squiggles in a word. When I say squiggles, I mean it in inverted commas, that they recognize to mean something, and they're going to be able to read the word based on that shape of the letter. So they might see the TE, and because you've done the word television with them, they know it's television. Okay, so but if you gave them T and say you gave them, they see the T and it's a long word, but the actual words would say tortoise, they might still think it's television because they know that T and a long word is going to be television because that's what you've taught them. So that's what he talks about as being in the transitional phase. And so we then move from the transitional to the alphabetic stage, where they start seeing the individual letters within the words, and they can put them together to find to say the word. So they might see the D or G, and they can say dog. And then the fourth phase is when you get into the orthographic phase, where they can just read the word. They know what the word is, they're exposed to the word, and they know what the word is. And so, again, what the important part here is that we use is that as the person begins to read, for the new words, they're not going to be in one phase for every word. So for you know, in a new text, there might be some of the words they might know, they might be functioning within the orthographic phase. Some words that might be functioning in the alphabetic phase, where they've actually got to sound it out. And that's why we will see when people are reading that they can read, and then they sound out. And so they can jump between these phases. And even really skilled readers, when you are reading something that maybe it's a word that you have not been exposed to, you actually have to sit and sound it out, and even maybe not even get the right word, because maybe it's a word that maybe is not in your language, or it's such an obscure word that you have to sound it out, even with, you know, the level of expertise as we are as readers. So, and I would always say to when I was a teacher in the classroom, and say, even I would say to them, I've been to university for 9 years, and still there's some words that I have to sound it out. So don't be embarrassed if you can't. Then they would sort of think, well, if the teacher has to sound it out and admits to this, then I can also sound it out, and not feel embarrassed at having to do that, or not feeling smaller or diminished because I have to do that. So that's the developmental stage. And then I found this very, very interesting, this next fact, because when we were asking a little bit earlier, why is it that our children then don't, sort of, if we're saying that AAC helps literacy, why is it that we are still having so many individuals who aren't able to read? And so there is a part in the brain called the fusiform face area, and it's in this part of the brain that actually sees words as pictures before we assign meaning. And within this fusiform, they actually also call it the visual word form area, or the VWFA, and it's in the left hemisphere of the brain, and it's responsible for interpreting text prior to association with phonology and semantics. And it holds this visual dictionary for us. So when we talk about, when us as teachers say, we've got to develop a sight word vocabulary bank for the child, this is what we've got to do. This is exactly in what area we are working at developing. The corresponding area in the right hemisphere is responsible for facial recognition. And in young children and in illiterate adults, both are used for face recognition, but then the visual word form area is co-opted for word recognition. And I'm going to, just in case this was such a word salad, I'm going to explain it to you a little bit more in this picture here. So what we see here is, this is as though you took a camera and you put it underneath your chin, and you're now looking up into the brain. So this is the left side, even though it's on your right, because of how the picture is depicted, and this is the right side. And what we see here is we have this visual face recognition area here in the right side and in the left side. But as we introduce words to children, is that the face recognition area decreases in size, and the word form area increases in size, and this part here takes over and what stores the words in the brain. And so we know this from the fMRIs. And, you know, there's so much more that we are learning daily because of the work of the neuroscientists. And so if we know that this is the part of the brain that I need to stimulate, okay, this is what I'm going to be doing, you know, sort of to help my child to be able to understand and to be able to, not to understand, to recognize the words. But what we can see here is there's a different area for shape. So just being able to recognize shapes doesn't necessarily mean to say that they're going to be able to recognize letters. And then, to make it even a little bit more complex, the very tip of this area in this word form actually goes to recognizing numbers. And even the numbers, when you give a Roman numeral, that number is not recognized here as a V, the V, but it'll be recognized as a 5 in here. And I was doing a workshop in America some time ago before COVID, and I was explaining this to the participants, and the one teacher said to me, you know, Maureen, this is so interesting because I'm a stroke recoverer, and I had when I initially, immediately after the stroke, I couldn't read at all and I couldn't recognize numbers. And she said, I've gained my reading ability, but the numbers are still baffling for me. And she says, while I can look at a clock and I can see the numbers, I can't interpret those numbers. And even if those numbers are in Roman alphabet form, I can't interpret them. And I found that so very, very interesting. So if you're wanting to read up more about that, you know, just Google the fusiform face area, and there's a whole lot of interesting stuff there. And I'm going to refer back to this when we come to the assessment a little bit later. Then we like the connection. I said this one is, for me, is also, there's so many different models and views, but this one really is something that speaks very clearly to me, is that reading is really about meaning. So, you know, the only reason why we read is to gain meaning. So, you know, reading without meaning is a pointless exercise, and some people can do that. I remember being in one workshop, and one of our Erin Alansa, former PhD students, was saying in one of the workshops we did, she said, you know, I had to learn to read Hebrew for my bat mitzvah, and she said, you know, I could read everything perfectly. I didn't understand a word of what I was saying, but, you know, it was, she could. She had worked out how to sorry. She had worked out how to decode the text, but it wasn't meaningful for her. So what we see is that the meaning processor influences the context processor, and then the context processor in turn impacts the meaning processor. And then we find that the phonological processor impacts the meaning processor, and then for the meaning processor affects the phonological processor. And then the orthographic also affects, you know, impacts the meaning processor, and the meaning processor impacts the orthographic. So I think that's a very important slide just to remember. And then as well is that, while we're saying that, is that when you and I listen to speech, we know that the neural the area, Broca's area, is activated when we listen to speech. So the area associated with words, they sometimes refer to it, you know, as a sound envelope. We can see that lights up under the fMRIs. But when we read silently, the same area is activated. We hear the written words in our heads. And so this is also how we can really understand for our if we to one of the earlier slides where we were talking about the difficulty that many of our clients or children or family members who have complex communication needs, how we can, via the reading process, we can actually also improve the language processes. So that's why literacy is really so very important, and it's very critical that we every interventionist working with children or young adults working in AAC, works also on developing literacy. So I'm not going to go very much into this slide, but it's a little bit of a repetition. But we just know that in adult readings, to develop the literate practice, we've got to take into consideration the learner, the learning context, the text and the tools we're going to use, and the activity and the purpose, which we're going to talk about when I go into the three different children, not children, young adults that I worked with, that I'm going to unpack a little bit later. But one of the things that what we very often comes up is, is there a particular font that we can use? And one of the areas is that you can look at is called Open Dyslexic, and that's a font that they have found to work very well with people who have dyslexia. And then, of course, the Arial, Comic Sans, Verdana, Tahoma, and the Century Gothic, they are very much easy for the person who has difficulty in reading. And what we see here is the Century Gothic and the Comic Sans. They use the same A that we would find in beginner texts. But, here we have the old-fashioned in the Verdana and the Tahoma. We have the, sort of like the old-fashioned or the typeset A. So that's just something just to bear in mind. So if I had to ask you now, because I think that whatever we think, if I think, well, one area is the most important in order for me to be successful at teaching reading, there's got to be one area that's going to be important. I'm going to really put a lot of effort into that area. So if I had to say which areas or components of language most affect or impact the acquisition of literacy, we have to ask it, is it about the meaning? So is it the child that sort of can really gain a lot of meaning from the text? If I have good semantic processing, would I be a better reader? Or if I have really good knowledge of grammar, would I be a better reader? Or phonology and phonics and awareness of sound, or the lexical processing, which would make me a better reader? And it comes down to logical awareness. And that's if we go through any text on reading from sort of book where she did I think I'm not sure if her study has now changed. At the time, sorry, somebody's talking. At the time when she published her study, it was the biggest N. It had the most number of participants in any study of literacy. And what she found was that it was the phonological awareness that impacted the acquisition of literacy in children. So if we know that, we need to then be very cognizant of that. if it impacts literacy, has a positive impact of literacy in children, it's also going to have a positive impact in literacy in adults. So what is phonological awareness? And a lot of you might know this, but I'm just going to go over it in case there are some of us that don't know it. So it really relates to the awareness that paragraphs can be broken down into sentences. Sentences can be broken down into words. Words can be broken down into syllables, which in turn can be manipulated to create new words. And that's the important part, which in turn can be manipulated to create more new words. And so what we do know is that as I'm speaking to you, it's just this stream of sounds that's coming out of my mouth. And at what point does one word end and another word begin? So even if we took even if we, we tried to slow it down, at what point does one person, if I was talking to you now and I said, hello, how are you? Is it hello, how are you? It's if you don't know how words look in the written form, you actually don't necessarily always know what is one word or what word has been split in the incorrect places. And so you and I, as Steven Pinker said, we hallucinate those white spaces between the words. So it's important that when we are teaching our young adults, particularly those who are pre-literate, in other words, that they haven't yet been exposed to literacy, so they're not illiterate, like that they actually have been exposed, and part of that brain in the fusiform face area is totally damaged, then we know that we have to teach them, phonological awareness. So the 5 components of phonological awareness, and somebody sort of said that they did do a lot of sounds and nursery rhymes. And nursery rhymes is, really one of the very the foundations of phonological awareness, or rhymes. Can I hear that words sound the same at the end? So, for example, this is really important because, like Kitty, you said you learned how to read with flashcards, but if you had the word that says fat, and then I take away the F and put an S, you now just know that that will be sat. And if I take away the S and put an H, you now know that that's hat, because you have that ability to rhyme. And you can take away the, you can do the first sound, by another sound. So if you can't hear the at the end, this becomes really very difficult. Then after the rhymes, and this is a hierarchical, is if I, once I can hear rhymes, I can then also hear syllables. And then I can hear the onsets and rhymes. So that means I can hear the the consonant, and then the vowel to the end of the word. So I can hear tr, ak, struck. So we talk about all the sh, up, make ship. So the first either consonant or diagraph will help me to know, okay, that 2 letters together with and then split up into the vowel and the rest of the word. We call that the onset and rhymes. And then can I hear the individual phonemes in words? And then can I also take away some a phoneme in a word and hear what's left? So, for example, if I've got the word farm, can I take away the f, and I'm just left with arm? But I've got to do this obviously all with my ears, not with the visual accompaniment. And those are going to help us, if we can help our students to be proficient at phonological awareness, they're going to be very well, they're going to have a very good foundation for literacy. So then we have to say, well, who needs to develop phonological awareness? And the truth is, you only need to develop phonological awareness if you are going to be learning an alphabetic script. Readers of Chinese who do not have an alphabetic script, they do not have to develop phonological awareness to successfully engage with their text. And in fact, in the 1950s, the Chinese government created a sound symbol association, an orthography, and excuse me, and I actually found that when introducing it to the people who were now going to learn to read the script, that they had no phonological awareness, or they weren't able to listen to be able to hear the sort of what I've just discussed with you in the previous slide. So that was also very interesting. So what we do know is that teaching the alphabet leads to the alphabetic leads to increased reading levels, and the alphabetic refers to phonological awareness, and then the phonemic awareness, the awareness of the sounds, and word analysis and synthesis. So that is, can I put sounds together like d, og, dog, or can I take the word dog and break it up into d, og? And it's like very interesting when you see a child or a young adult who can't do it. I remember with a grade 1 child who was able to speak, and I was saying to her, listen to this word log. What's the first sound in log? And, I work in the field of AAC, so I can sit for a whole minute with a face of expectation and, that you're going to get it. And, a face looking like at the child with support and kindness. And I was just looking at this child as she was saying, log, log, log. She could not hear that the L was a distinct unit away from the og. She just couldn't hear it. And I just knew that this was going to be one of the most difficult children to work with, and she was. And in the field, we talk about surface dyslexia and phonological dyslexia. And she definitely had phonological dyslexia because she just couldn't hear those sounds. So we know that this phonological awareness definitely is very critical for our adults. And we've spoken about the last section there. So the acquisition of reading really is a complex task, and yet it's very simple to teach. And that's always been the wonderful thing about being teachers of reading, is that that we understand neurally it's complex, but we are wired to learn to read. And if we approach it in a very systematic way, we're going to be very successful. So if I look at our letters of the alphabet in English, we have 26 letters and they make 44 sounds. But those 44 sounds are represented in 187 different ways. So, like, for example, if you think of the, you've got the OU as in cough, OU as in rough, OU as in dough, OU as in oo, like in through. So, those 26 letters in a different combinations just have those 127 different sounds. And about 50% of all the words, roughly, are phonetically regular, and about 37% follow patterns. So once I know that you can make an ow or an oo sound, I can apply it to the pattern and say, if I'm looking at the word C-L-O-U-D, and I look at it and I think, OU makes an oo sound like in you. Clued, no, that doesn't make sense. So then I think again, it also makes an ow like in loud. And then I see C-L-O-U-D, I get to the word cloud. So then I've followed a pattern or a rule. And about 13% of our words are irregular and difficult to learn. So that brings us to now. You would then think that we should only have to deal with phonological awareness, but the answer is unfortunately not, because 80% of all the high frequency words are not phonetically regular, and so they need to be learned by sight. So that's why we, those who learned the words via sight, flashcards were learning perhaps those very high frequency words, and those who were learning phonics were probably using they were following a phonics program with their teacher at school. So the research is really unified in suggesting the very beneficial effects of the auditory feedback in literature development and listening comprehension. So, this is what we've really got to sort of, be very aware of, is that, is that the phonological awareness is critical to incorporate in all of our teaching strategies. So we ask ourselves, is reading reliant on the visual perceptual skills or the language skills? And what we have seen is that it really has moved away from it being purely a problem with visual and interpreting, BDs and PDs and transposing letters. That remains true. But the real sort of could be what we would now refer to as surface dyslexia. But the real problems is going to come in with phonological dyslexia. Those are going to be the areas or the individuals that are going to be the hardest to work with to assist. So we need to know that awareness of sounds, we need an awareness of sounds in words. We need to be able to recode those letters into the acoustic sound, and we need to hold that information in our working memory. And so we know that phonological awareness does not appear spontaneously, but it must be taught to the beginner reader. So we now need to know that we build on the print form onto that solid phonological, semantic, and syntactic base. And very often what you might hear is that people would say, oh, but you know what, our children or our adults that we're working with, they can't make those sounds. So therefore we shouldn't teach them, phonics, or we shouldn't develop the phonological awareness. We really need to teach them let's really consider whether that is the correct way to go. So when teaching our phonological awareness, what we now need to know is that the size of the word is important. So it's easier to break a sentence into words and then words into syllables than to break the syllables into phonemes. So often, what you'll start off with, and this is where when you're doing things like karaoke with the older students, and they can see the little red board jumping from word to word, they really get into that feeling of, that this song or this verse consists of these sentences, and these sentences consist of these words. And that the number of phonemes in the words, it's easier to break up short words like n, o, or c, or k-ap, than longer words like sin, ort, or sil, eep, or skr, ap. So that is something also to remember, particularly when you're doing your planning for your lessons. And then the phoneme position in the words is also important. It's easier to hear the initial consonants than the final consonants. And then as well, it's easier to hear the final consonants than the middle consonants. So we always start off first sound, last sound, middle sound. And that's just how it works for the position in words. And then the properties of the sounds, like they call them the continuant sounds, like the s and the are much easier to hear than the brief sounds like t. Okay, so I'm always going to start off like I'm going to say to the child, listen to the word man. Can you hear the first sound in man? It's easier for them to hear if I say, listen to this word tap. Can you hear the first sound in tap? Because they haven't got so much auditory stimulation to hold on to. And then the last part here is that the phonological awareness, the challenge is that like the rhyming and the initial phoneme identification are easier than the blending and the segmenting. So the blending is the analysis, and the segmenting is the blending is the synthesis, and the segmenting is the analysis. And then if we're looking at, the young adult or the older child who's come to us to learn, to read, if we look at the graph here, if we see that the child or the young adult has good phonological skills and good semantic skills, we're going to find that they're going to be good readers. So if they have poor phonological skills and good semantic skills, those are going to be the individuals that's going to have dyslexia. And that's why you very often find with, not with the population with complex communication needs, but, sort of those of us who are also teaching children to read who are able to speak. And, like the families are sometimes really shocked to say, my child is, they use the most amazing vocabulary. They are so articulate, and we're just shocked that reading has now become so difficult for them. And they fit into this area here. But if we have poor phonological skills and poor semantic skills, we're going to find that those are the children with specific learning difficulties. And then those with good phonological skills but poor semantic skills, they're going to be they're going to have poor comprehension. And I thought this was a very, very nice diagram to explain that, also something that you could use to explain to parents if you're working with parents as well. So in preparation for this talk today, I also went back into the literature to look at from successful AAC users. When we've looked at them, and they've given feedback of what is it that made you a successful reader. And what they sort of said is it was definitely parental support, and then also the persistent and determination of the readers. So, that they really, really wanted to read. And some of them would also say, this is the feedback from the readers, like my parents knew I could read, or they never babied me. My parents and my granny read to me every day because I never gave up. And I'm really bullheaded and I like learning things, and I am smart. So that was their worlds that made, sort of their inner worlds that made them good readers. And then, of course, there are some real good advantages when we're looking at, teaching adult learners, because really they are equal partners in the process, and they are keen and motivated because, this is something that they've chosen to do. They take ownership for their development. They have greater life experience than the children. And their meta-linguistic and metacognitive skills are more developed. So we can talk to them about, phonic rules and language and language rules, because they understand, how they think about words and sentences and sounds. And one of the things is that really they do have time. Many people with complex communication also have, sort of a lot of long leisure time on their hands. But of course, there are also challenges, and I think that sometimes class attendance is difficult. They have less exposure than what they would have if they were now, sort of within the school situation. And of course, the expense of going to a tuition or to a speech therapist for therapy, and a lot of the resources are younger population. And then we also have the emotional factors, the fear of failure, the self-fulfilling prophecy of, I've never been able to learn thus far, maybe I won't be able to learn going forward. And then also negative feedback that they might have experienced when they were younger. So, going forward, as I was saying earlier, there's not a lot of empirical research as to the best teaching strategies for adults. But what we definitely do know that an eclectic approach is the best, that we make use of, definitely we're going to build on that phonological base, in the letters onto that sound phonological base. Okay. So I did say in the abstract that I was going to do something on assessment, because one of the things that I am often asked for, how do we assess our clients, so that we know that what we are assessing is that we are able to meet them where they are at. So I've got this wonderful book, I'm going to come back. Okay. So I'll come back to the book. Sorry, I thought I was on the next slide. I think that when we come, we're going to really ask ourselves and them, who are our clients? And I've unpacked this, so I'm going to just leave that slide out. What have their literacy experiences been thus far? Have they been exposed to literacy instruction? Have they been exposed to a text-rich environment? Has the AAC system or set that they have, has it been used to facilitate better literacy skills? We're going to look at those kinds of questions. We're going to say, how were they taught? Did they have any instruction or no instruction or intermittent instruction? And then did they learn using a synthetic approach or the phonic approach or bottom up or the syllabic approach? Those are what we spoke about when you were thinking about how you learned. Did they use an analytic approach like sight words or flashcards? We also call that a top-down approach. Or did they use a language experience or the look and say? Did they make use of the basal readers or the individual reading programs? So as soon as I know as how that child or the young adult has learned, I can say, especially now I can say, how did it work for you? And then, or like, no, it didn't work, or it did work, I just didn't get enough exposure to it. And then I can start planning on how am I going to customize my teaching for this individual. So what emotions did they evoke? Was it excitement, anxiety, despondency, eagerness, dread, positivity, negativity? And, these are, it's important for us to know. And then why do they want to learn? Is it for leisure? Is it for study? Is it for quality of life? Is it to be better communicators so they can spell out a word that they don't necessarily have stored in their speech generating device or on their communication boards? Is it for self-esteem? And that's going to help us as well. And then what do they want to read? Fiction or social media, or, what is it that they're wanting to read? And then what are their strengths and challenges? So I think that one of the things that we're going to bear in mind when we have that we have that information, we're going to always go from the known to the unknown. We're going to go from the simple to the complex. We're going to relate back to their life experiences. And when we're teaching, particularly when we're teaching phonics, we're going to teach dissimilar pairs. So I'm not going to teach, for example, when I'm teaching, say, the long O sound, like the OA, I'm not going to teach the OA and then the O with the marker E and the OW. I'm not going to teach those three together because they're too similar. So I'm going to maybe teach the OA, an O sound, with the AY as the next one, so that they are very distinct from each other. And then to know what are called hooks from the clutter. And the hooks from the clutter is, what am I giving this individual that's really going to help him to remember, as opposed to giving him too much information that's just going to clutter what I'm trying to teach him. So to be very, very aware of that. I learned this lesson so very well from a child. I was teaching the child, and it was in the early days. It must have been like in the early 90s, and computers were pretty new. I remember her picking up the mouse and just clicking the mouse towards my face as though the mouse was the TV remote, basically. Just be quiet and let me think. And yeah, one learns some of the best lessons from the children. Okay, so when we're looking at the technology that people using complex communication, who have complex communication needs, if we're looking at the technology that they have, is that we want to set the speak display on their device, whether it's an iPad or a dedicated device like a Tobii or a PRC device. You want to set the display to the largest font, and we want the font to be in lowercase, because the reading that they're going to be exposed to is going to be in lowercase, not capitals. And most of the devices come with a phonic page, so we want to use that. And then I always say, use a 3-time strategy when you're learning something. Say it 3 times, or write it 3 times, or be exposed to it 3 times, rather than a once off. And then always use whatever residual speech the student has. So even if the student isn't able to, I'm going to talk to you about Emil a little bit later, but like he can't even get a mouth closure, lip closure, but he can go, oh. He's got that ability. So if he was reading the word apple to me, I wanted to hear, oh, oh. I wanted to hear that it had 2 syllables in it. I didn't just want to hear, oh. So, and then we'll find that others have, sort of maybe slightly better abilities than that. So let's use whatever they have. Okay, and this is the excellent resource, and I'm not sure if there are any of you that know this. It's the Danielson Diet. It is a standardized test, and it's got norms, but we can also use it for, just as to look at the criterion as well, to see what is it that the individual has. So we don't have to use it in a standardized manner. And basically, I'm not going to go through this whole slide, because I know you can read it faster than I can, but basically it has 12 tests. I have put it down because I know that you might ask, this is going to go up onto I think Shakila puts it up onto YouTube afterwards, and so you can kind of go back and read it quietly on your own. But I have unpacked it, and I'm going to go through this quite quickly now, just because of time. But basically, in the first test, what we are looking at is, can the child or the adult, the older or the adult, can they read words that have a vowel and a consonant, or a consonant, vowel, consonant? So they have to read the words, and then they've got to answer yes or no. And once they answer yes, we can sort of ascertain, yes, that they were able to read that and understand it, and be able to read those words. So we're looking at, can they read vowel consonants or consonant vowel consonant words. Then it goes a little bit more complex. We're looking at consonant, vowel, consonant, consonant. So we've got, like, say, D is the consonant, and then the vowel, and then the CK, or else the consonant, consonant, vowel, consonant. And it gets more complex as we go along. Then can the child read multisyllabic words like animal? And then we're going to look at 3 consonants, a vowel, 2 consonants, or 1 consonant, a vowel, 3 consonants, and go on from there. That word string is incredibly hard for children to read. You can sort of see that, that put to their stir is like quite difficult. And then it gets a little bit more complex. And so at the point where we can see that they can't read the sentence and answer yes or no, we know that they probably are at a level before that. Sorry. We probably know that we've got to go back a level or 2 in our reading instruction. And then we're going to look at irregular words. And then we're going to look at, sort of following some of the rules, like the open vowel groups and the closed vowel groups. So sometimes they know it as the 1-1-1 rule and the 1-2-1 rule. So basically, if you have a vowel, a consonant, and a vowel, then the first vowel is long and says his name. So if I have here, I've got the A and the E. So I've got a vowel, a consonant, and a vowel. This first vowel is long, A, and then the E is quiet, plates. But if I've got a vowel, 2 consonants, and a vowel, then the first vowel is short and it says its sound. So there I get the dinner. And then we've got also where the R controls the vowel. And soft C, soft G. And then we're going to go on to the vowel families. And that, remember, I was saying to you earlier that these, about 37% of all words, sort of will follow a vowel or a phonic rule. Okay. So we're just going to go on. I'm not going to go through this all because you can have a look. Look through those. But it is a very, very, and if anybody wants, sort of wants this as well, I can send it to you. Okay. Then it looks at like the diphthongs. Diphthongs again. And then irregular spelling. Let's just go back to the irregular spelling. So here we can see that it's getting sort of quite complex, like which of these are used by gardeners, automatic washing machine, lawn mowers, faulty refrigerators, beautiful pictures. And they have to answer those questions. Okay. So basically that test goes from so basically it goes from the age of 5 years, 3 months to about 9 years. And I just see I have a question here from Rushta. It says, with regards to using these standardized tests on a South African population, assume that they are criterion referenced on a different population. So you would suggest that informal testing be done together with these tests to obtain a more accurate idea? Yes. So basically it's a standardized test, But now I can go, because of how I've broken it up for you, you can then say, instead of, can a dog run, you can then say, okay, I'm going to use the same, consonant, vowel, consonant. So I can maybe say, can a pig sit? So I can then start creating my own sentences, sort of to make a criterion based a test. But also remember that it doesn't have to be, the actual reading age isn't necessarily what you're looking at. You're looking at, okay, here I've got a benchmark, and next year, can I see that there's been some improvement? So that's what I can also look at. So again, it's about letting the test help us then, rather than letting the test not help us. So how can this test help me to help this individual? So then there are that we can use as well. And of course, as soon as we use adaptations, the standardization of the test isn't solid anymore. But we still want to know, rather than getting to know. If I said to you, well, this child's reading age is 8.7, how is 8.7, how's it going to inform me any differently from if I said it was 8.3 or 8.9? So I really want to know, as the person working with, how do I go forward with teaching this individual? So one of the things that you could say to the child, are you sure that you could read all those words on the page? And then they will indicate yes or no, or yes, most, but I didn't know this word. They can indicate with you with a pointing and a shrug of the shoulder. You will have your own way of asking the question. But also you could give 4 pictures of the word, like say, is a windmill an animal? So you can point to the word windmill and say, is it this picture? Is it this picture? Or is it this picture? Always remember, when we're giving a picture format for them to answer, is that we want to give them 3 or more pictures, because when I only give 2, they only have to choose between, there's a 50% chance of them getting it correct. So, 3 or 4 is what I normally go for. So those are just some of the adaptations that we can use. Okay, then there's just more, which I'm not going to go through, because you can go through this when you go through it, if you need to come back and have a look at it, just because of our time. But we can also do the copy a sentence, and then visual discrimination. This is what I do want to go on a little bit more, because remember when we were talking about the fusiform face area, is that it is different from that recognizes shape and pictures. So I do want to know, can my young adult recognize, find the same picture? So if he sees the chair, can he find the same chair? If he sees the man with the hat on, can he find the other man with the hat on? The policeman with the arm pointing to the left as the same as this policeman. So I do want to see that. And then I do want to see if he can find letters, that he can find the same letters, and that's in the target. So that also helps me, because if I know he can't, I then go into dynamic assessment, and then I start, doing the teach, test, teach. And I might then, instead of having it three letters, I might just take it down to 2 letters, and that's where I'm going to see where we are at. Then we also just do need to know, do they know their letters? And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that when we talk about Emile later. So this is just you don't have to go and make it up, it's already there for you. And then the oral discrimination, which is they call it oral discrimination, but we now sort of calling it part of the phonological awareness, or the phonemic awareness. Can you find first line a picture that starts with a S, and then they find sun? Can you find in the last line a picture that starts with a D, and they find the dog? And then you can go on to, sort of, this can also help you just to sort of make up your own little tests, just seeing, word recognitions, just from simple to more complex. And reading out the words as well. And then the picture test, if they see the cat, can they find the word cat? Because remember as well, is that visual recognition is a more simple cognitive task than visual recall. So if I come back and I don't have the picture of the cat and I just have these words here, and they've got to read it on their own, cat, gap, cad, or cat, that's more difficult than saying, well, here's cat, can you find it in the text bar? And so that is just something to be aware of, that the visual recognition is easier than visual recall. Then also, for if we have sort of a young adult or an older child is more proficient, and we wanting just to see, sort of like maybe it's the individual has had been at school, had an injury, you're not sure if they are able to read, but like they've indicated that they can read. There are some nice this is the nice test here for them in this this Daniels and Dike book. So it's very comprehensive, and I use it all the time. As I say, I'm not the actual scores don't really, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the skill level. And then, of course, there is a grading, a spelling test, but there's lots of spelling tests that we can use, like the Hodgkin's and the Dolch tests, and the there's many tests that we can use, that UCT spelling tests as well, that do have that have standardized tests. And then is just more, which I'm not going to go over altogether, because you can just have a look at that. And then we're going to go on to Emil and how I went about teaching Emil. So what had happened was, we had got, it was, I think, in about 2004, we had gone to Isaac in America, in Washington, D.C., and Emil and his mom came, and I think Emil was 16 at that stage, and they had come to Isaac. And I can really encourage, if you are able to go to an Isaac, it's amazing, just amazing. And there's a lot of sessions for people who use AAC and their family and carers. And Emil and his mom, Marsha, had gone to many of the sessions. And at the session, one of the men had said, he learned to read when he was 40. And this just blew Marsha's mind. And she just thought, like, how is it that Emil can't read? He's 16 and he can't read. And then I had left Durban and I'd gone to Australia, and I think I'd come back from Australia, and she called me up and she said, my husband and I want to take you for breakfast. So, well, that will be very nice. Thank you very much. And they said, we've always wanted Emil to learn to read. And, but if you, and like they looked at me so, with such pointed eyes, they said, Maureen, if you tell us that he will never be able to learn to read, we will set our hearts at rest and we will not pursue this anymore. And I looked at them and I said, Marsha and Brian, I don't believe at all that he won't be able to learn to read. I had never been his teacher, and so he started coming for lessons. And we're going to go through a lot of what we're going to do is based on what I've already spoken about. So basically, he started his lessons in 2005. So, I mean, it is a long time ago. Now, Emil had been at school, and he had, but he had been in the he had been in the class that didn't really focus on academics. So they did have like a smattering of literacy and numeracy, but it wasn't, that wasn't really there in those days, their focus. And and then what also happened is that, very often the children, as we know, with the, they get taken out for the therapies or physio in maybe, sort of the instruction time, and they miss out, etc. So I did a baseline test on him, and I did it on just looking at the most frequently used words in the spoken language. And I'd taken I had made up my own list based on the spoken language, written language, and the words that are used in grade 1 readers. And of those words, Emil could read 26. Now, Emil, as I said to you before, he can't get lip closure, and he can just make a boop sound. But what he could do is he had a very rudimentary one-hand signing. Second, his non-dominant hand is very contracted with the wrist, almost going back onto the forearm. So he does do one-hand signing, but then sort of often approximations of the full sign. But he could show me by either pantomime or a sign that he knew the word, and he could either tell it to me with a sign, or he could give it to me on his Delta talker, which is one of the devices that was kind of ahead of its time in the day, but now is sort of quite obsolete. And he did know all of his letters. He did know that. Now, I know that if you know 26 words, there's no reason why you can't learn 260 words. And therefore, there's no reason why you can't learn 2,600 words. And therefore, there's no reason why you can't learn words, because I know that he's got in place the ability to learn. And so we started on the journey of learning to read. So he attended 1-hour lessons a week. He was no longer in the residential school where he was previously at, and he was at home, and he had a lot of time on his hands. And so we really worked on developing his phonological awareness. And then every week at home, he had to learn 10 new words that was based on a program that I developed years ago, and that I've, sort of almost forgotten by now. But it was basically a reading program called the Bridge to Literacy. And so those words is what I spoke about today. I put the words into that were what came from, the high frequency words, the words that are used by people who use AAC, and words from the Dolch list. And then we also used Gail van Tatenhove's manual board, and we took words from Sue Balladin's word list, which is one of the word lists that is available in AAC texts. And so every day he had to learn 10 new words. Now, I always, when I say to somebody, how many words can you learn a day? Do you want 3, 5, or 10? Or I might say 7, 10, or 15. And I let them choose how many, and he chose that he wanted to learn 10 words a day. He had the time, and he could sit and learn 10 words a day. And he started doing this, which gives us, say, 50 words a week. We then, and just when I want to just come back to this is, next week, Gail van Tatenhove is talking to us from Orlando, Florida. And let me just tell you, she is an absolute powerhouse in the field of AAC. And if you can make it, I encourage you with everything that I have, you know, to say, please make it, because it will be so valuable to you. And she can maybe even share with you, and I'm sure she perhaps will share with you, her manual board as well. We then went on with Emil, is that we started learning words, because remember at the beginning when I was talking to you about these young adults, or, you know, sort of older learners, Emil was 21 at the time, they have that ability to be able to think about how they think, and to be able to think about how they process language. And so we can work with them with the rules. And so we just had the first rule, which was the one rule. You know, if you have one vowel and one consonant, the vowel is short. And if you have one consonant, one vowel, you know, so if we have the O and the N, then it's we'll say on, okay? And of course, this is for, there's always going to be exceptions to the rules, but the rules are, you know, there's so many words that follow the rules and the exceptions, so we don't get caught up in the exceptions in the beginning. So we started with the 1-1 rule, and we went through those lists, and we found all those little words that were phonetically regular. And then we have the one vowel, one syllable rule. So if it's got one vowel and one and it's only it's only a one syllable, then that vowel is going to be long. So if I got the S and the O, so there I can see there's one vowel in it and one syllable, you know, that vowel could be when the vowels at the end would be a long vowel. So I can say so or B, you know, or the BE makes B. And remember that the Y is also a vowel. It can be both a consonant and a vowel. So, you know, we don't say terria, we say terri. So we went over that rule. And then the next rule is, we often call it the fairy E, those of us who work with children, or the magic E. So we have the, I spoke about it a little bit earlier as the open vowel group. So we went over that rule, the 1-1 and the E rule. Going forward, we went over when the R changes vowels. So, you know, that when you have AR, the A changes to an R sound, and then the E, I, and UR changes to an and OR changes to an OR. So we went over those rules, and we had a little phonic book, and we would write the phonic rule at the top, and then we would you know, populate it as we were reading. Oh, let's put this into our phonic book under the right rule. Okay, then if you this is called the 1-1-1 rule. So we spoke about it earlier. So you have in the word hoping, you've got the O and the I, and with only one consonant between it. So it's going to make the first be long and say his name. Same as in the word navy. You've got the A and the Y with one V between it. So the first vowel says his name. A, navy. Motor. So there it says the O sound. We went through that. We went through the 1-2-1 rule. So that is when you have one vowel and another vowel split by two consonants, then the first consonant is short. So we've got running or hunted or jogged. And then the two vowel rule. Often those of us who are teaching, we make the little jingle when two vowels go walking. The first one does the talking and he says his name, and the second vowel is quiet. So, you know, here we can see the word paid. Here we've got two vowels together. The first one says his name, A, and the second one is quiet. And also, Emil, and later when I talk a bit about Jonah, they weren't too grown up that they didn't like little jingles. You know, they were happy to listen to Schoolhouse Rock and go onto YouTube and listen to jingles. you know, and enjoy that. So, you know, again, you would probe that with them, you know, like it would if we listen to this, would you feel it's a little bit babyish for you, or is it something that you would like to listen to? So they were quite happy to listen to that. And then, of course, we went on to the consonant and the LE rule. So that is when you have the LE at the end of the word. The L is blended with the consonant and the E is quiet. So like in apple, we say apple and the E is quiet. We went on to that. And this is quite nice just to have as a like a tick list as you're going through and teaching, you know, to say, okay, if I go through these rules, I'm going to have covered pretty much, you know, sort of most of the very basic rules. Okay, and so this is the, when I was talking about the Baladin list, this is the Baladin list that I took the words from, one of the sources that I took with him, and it's because these are the words used by adults in sort of like the core words used by adults in you know, sort of in general conversation. And basically how they get these core words is they listen, they take the adults, you know, they put a little tape recorder on them, and they take them and you know, sort of like type out all every word that they said in every conversation, up to I think 1 million. I think Kirsten will be a little bit better knowing this. I think it's 1 million words, or you know, at that point, and then they put it through the computer system, and then it'll see how many times did they use the word a, and how many times did they use the word that, and how many times help. And that's how they get their word lists. What Emil also had to do is he had to type up a sentence for each new word that he learned. And this was incredibly difficult for Emil because being a one-hand signer, he didn't really have good syntax or good grammar. Because remember, in sign language, the grammar is contained in the non-manual features. It's in your facial expression, and you know, future tense is how far away the hand is from the body, and past tense is, you know, you step back, you know, a little bit and lean back to show it's in the past tense. And so Emil's grammar was really poor, but also his use of were mainly nouns. So, you know, he would tell me things like this: Saturday, Gavin, pavilion, chicken. And I would have to, oh, okay. So on Saturday, he went to the pavilion, which is a big store, a mall in Durban, with his friend Gavin, and he had chicken. You know, but Emil just, you know, verbs and adjectives and pronouns, and it just kind of really weren't there. So this was a case of how learning to read also helped him with his own internal language and opening those you know, those word envelopes in his brain going forward. So when he would come with his homework, he was able to use a computer, and he would type out his sentences, and you know, they weren't corrected by his mum at home. He would come, and then we would.
Yes, I made it. Don't worry. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
He would come and. Please, if you have your microphone on, if you can turn it off, thank you. And then what we would do is we would take his sentences and cut them up, and then have him put them back together into the right order, because as I said, that was like really difficult for him. And then again, you know, to choose books, he always chose his own books. And sort of, we would go to the library, we'd offer him, we'd sort of say, like, sort of, these kinds of books or these kinds of books. And I also have a lot of books at home, because I've been teaching for so many years, and he could choose whatever books that took his fancy. However, with Emil, he's just sports mad. So he, any book that had sport, sort of a book, even fiction or non-fiction, he would read. I mean, I learned so much about golf and the development of the golf ball, because this was what he was fascinated in. Emil's actually a golfer, and from all the different golf courses around the world, from to Scotland and the links, and he just lapped them all up. So basically, when we started with him, we definitely went on high interest, low vocab books, and he moved along very, very nicely with that. And these are some lovely publishers that you can look at when you are looking for high interest, low vocab books. Definitely the DK publishers. I love DK. The Follett books, Gareth Stephen Publishing, the High Interest Publishing book, High Noon books, Keystone books, the Orca books, and Stone Arch graphic novels. Really lovely books to sort of to get hold of. At that stage, when Emil was learning, where there wasn't as much in terms of online books, and so we didn't make use of that at all. But Jonah, who I'm going to talk to you about in a few minutes, we did do a lot of online books. Okay, so again, when we're teaching and we're working in, with connective text with our older students, we need to be very aware of the levels of reading. So we get independent reading, or a book that is independent. That means the child or the young adult can pick up the book and can read without any support from a more proficient reader. And it's instructional reading. Means that there's going to be 2 words per page that they're not going to be able to read, that they're going to either have to sort of sound it out or get additional help. And then the next is the level is frustration, where there's going to be about 4 or 5 words on a page that they don't know how to read. Okay, so we would what I would do is, with Emil, I would always have a text that's at instructional level and frustration level, because I wanted to move him from just being independent. I wanted to move him to be a more fluent reader. And so all the time with him, I would sort of, when I give him a book, always, if there are pictures in it, let them have time just to look through the pictures. Ask him to think about the story and kind of have a guess about what's going to happen. You can ask closed-end questions about, just to orientate him to some of the vocabulary. And then particularly if your person that you're working with, doesn't have access to a lot of vocabulary, you could tell them what you think about the book and what might happen, and model to them sort of a good sort of good thought processes for the books. If it's a chapter book, I always start a chapter book by reading the title, and then I will read the first and the last line of every page, or every paragraph on the page. And then again, sort of ask the closed-ended questions. I think I might have repeated that. I'm sorry. Then for Emil's lessons, I would always I would always read to him from the books that he chose as well. And so he would choose a book, and then I would just point to he would point to the words, and I would only read the words that he was pointing to. Because remember, I want to expose Emil to as many words as possible that he can see and at the same time hear that word. So if I just let him read at his pace, using a speech generating device, exposed to as many words and pages as we could do if I was with him pointing. Not pointing across his plate, I would just stop.
Melissa, can we please ask you to stop raising your hand?
Sorry. Okay. Books again, we chose from those, that list that I showed you. The fiction and the books for the younger readers, and then we moved on to the web series, which was really very a very wonderful series. Unfortunately, they're out of print, but some of you might still you might still have some of them in your schools. And then he really had to use his Delta talker to read the sentences. And then after he had composed the sentence from the reading book, he then had to listen to it with his own voice. When I'm saying his own voice, has been the Delta talker. And that ensured that he was really understanding what he was reading, and it ensured that the comprehension remained intact. Because you can imagine that he's looking at the reading book, then he's got to go onto his device, find the code for that word, then go back to the next word in the reading book, find the code, put it in, go back, and so he could lose a lot of context in doing that. And so that's what we did with him going forward. We then did a 10 minutes of an adapted paired reading. I'm not going to go through this because we are running out of time. And, if you just Google paired reading, you will be able to just have a look up about paired reading. But if anybody wants a handout on paired reading for children who are who are able to speak as well, you can email me and I can send that to you, and it gives all the instructions. So we're going to some paid reading. I know you know about the paid reading, but I think that it's also so important that we remember that people, doesn't matter what age you are, we need praise, and we need praise frequently, and we need it sort of honestly, with enthusiasm and with real care and love person. So I think that is aware of. So I do have a whole hand on that, which I will send on to you, as well as the precision reading. The precision reading is also known as speed reading. So I can send that on to you. I just don't want to miss out on what we do. And the last two clients I want to tell you about. So reading, sort of continued slowly. And for him, it is a slow process, and it could take Emil an hour to read a full page using the Delta talker. But obviously, if he just reads in his head, it's much quicker. And by the time we had stopped with our lessons, he was already reading The Alchemist, The Girl with the Pearl Earring, books from Oprah's, at that stage, her book club, and he was thoroughly enjoying his reading. So it was a really, really successful intervention. Okay, we worked on the phonological awareness. We listened to rap music. We, sort of segmented the words into the onset and rhymed. I would give him a target word, and he had to find a word that rhymes with those words. We played games with it, and he was really, really a very keen learner. He had to sort objects or pictures into groups that had similar syllables, and find words that had sort of similar sounds, beginning sounds, middle sounds, end sounds. And, he really enjoyed that. And, Emil is now literate, he's able to read, and I say it's absolutely, absolutely wonderful. Okay, and then we're going to move on to Jonah. Now, Jonah was a client of Gail, who if you come next week, you're going to be very lucky to listen to her. And he was very, very physically and medically vulnerable, and he wanted to learn to read, and he lives in America. And this was in I think about 2016. So it was definitely before COVID started. And so we started working with him, learning how to read over Skype. And so in a way, we were ahead of the curve. And so we had an initial meet and greet, and I was just going to see, like, is this something that he would, is this something that I would be able to to be able to help him with. But they just decided straight away that no matter what I thought about this, they were taking me on. So we also, gathered as much information from his mom about him, and he also answered questions. He was very honest. He was at that stage 16. And he indicated that no, he did not know his letter sounds and his letter names. He was very sure about that. But he had, because he was working with Gail had started introducing some of the Dolch words to him. And, she was, but at that stage, she was sort of saying to me, Maureen, I'm not a teacher of reading. Will you come on board with it? So what I knew about him was that he could find the icons in his pod book. Now, a pod book is it's designed by an Australian lady called Gail Porter, and basically it's a big, thick books with like an enormous amount of vocabulary organized in, sort of like systematically. And I knew that he could find the icons in his pod book. So I knew he could see. And I knew he could identify pictures, but again, that didn't mean that he could identify letters and sounds. So we then went on to, what we was talking about earlier with the Daniels and Dye test. We went on to see if he could just match letters to letters. And what I also found with him was that for some reason, he had also been in a Jewish school, and so the Jewish orthography goes from right to left. So his pod book was actually organized that you would scan from right to left to right, and getting his eye pattern to move in a different way. So we started really doing a lot of eye exercises and we knew that while he had been exposed to the pod book with the pictures and the words, he had not given any attention to the actual words. So we now had to sort of start helping him to move away from just the pictures and the words, and start fading the pictures and bringing the words more into the foreground. And he loved listening to the jingles on YouTube. and he started to learn the letter names. And we truly did. We did Jolly Phonics, and we did Schoolhouse Rocks, and we did, I'd just sort of put in, like the AR song, and then, somebody would have put up a lovely song on the, on the AR sound, and we started blending the 2 and the 3-letter words, as we showed in those, like Rule 1 and Rule 2 that I spoke about a little bit earlier, and then started introducing the words from, it was actually one of the words that was in Mirinda in the 1984 book, and we introduced just like the 3-letter words, and he started grasping them. But again, the reason why I'm using the word lists is that I want him, when reading is so difficult for you, you want the words that they're going to learn to read to have the most impact. So I want him to be able to read the word. I want him to be able to read the word can, which is a word that's going to be used much more often than, say, the word hop. So that's why I chose those very, very high frequency, or they also are known as core vocabulary words, to teach it to him, not the, the fringe vocabulary or the words that are used less frequently. And then we progressed on to the vowel digraphs, and we started adding them to his page on his device. And I'll just show you, I just want to go forward a little bit just to show you the device. That's what his device looked like. And you can just see all the vowels that we had introduced to him, but it was started populating. I didn't populate like all the A's at the same time. This is like sort of at the end of it, it was the AI, AY, and then we learned about the OA, and then the UE, and then we would go on to the AR. So we jumped around. So as I say, one of those rules, or one of the things to bear in mind, is to teach dissimilar pairs. And then we would read books together. His mom was always, he had significant cortical visual impairment, and the window in which he could actually read was so limited that we had to have the book in a very special way on a stand that and his mom would move the book up and down, while pointing to the words while he had to follow. And then he would find, some of the words. He was using a Unity program, and then, like say, we would find a word that we had learned, and then he would have to go and find the word so that he could read it out aloud. And then he would also practice the words from his low-tech communication board, which was actually customized for him by Gail van Tatenhove, which wasn't her low-tech board, but it was a board that was customized for him. And then because he was at that point, he was operating his device via eye gaze, and eye gaze was very difficult for him because of his actual physical disability. He just found it very difficult, and in fact we then changed him over to becoming a scanner, and even though scanning took much longer, he was much more accurate with it, and he didn't want to go back onto his eye gaze. And then we would write emails. He loved to write to his brothers, and we would do that together in a very supportive way. And then he even developed a private web page, and just loved having, sort of being able to put the information about him on his web page, and it became a very meaningful experience for him. And we would, on his device, we would listen to the words on his vowel page. We would look for like the hidden words within the target word. So that is like, say, if we were having the word farm, which I wouldn't have taught the word farm, that's not I'm just trying to think now, like, oh, maybe start. Then we would look to see, can you find the word tart in start, or can you find the word art in start? So, we would look for hidden words so that he's not just seen it as a word picture, that he's really attending. I'm moving him out of maybe that, that logographic phase into the transitional to the alphabetic phase. And we would do that. We would identify letter blends that we had covered in other words. We would do spelling approximation. Now, remember, on the high devices, you could hide keys. So we would have like the alphabetic page, and then I would just blank out certain letters of the alphabet, and just have, like, say 3 or 4 letters. So I would say, okay, we're going to spell the word was, and then I would give him the W, and then he had to find like the AS, or I would give him WA, and he had to find the S, sort of depending on the sessions. And we would later we would find the words in the word list. And I also have, if anybody wants this and you want to make use, if you're wanting to know, to have the all the words from that high frequency word list, if you want me to provide it to you in their phonic families, I'm very happy to share that with you as well. And that really kind of took us to Jonah. The great sadness is Jonah's no longer with us, and he passed, and it sort of was very distressing, sort of for all of us. But he was the most amazing young man to work with, and I learned such a lot from him, for which I'm always going to be so incredibly grateful. And then the last 2 minutes I've got, which is really only 2 minutes that I'm going to talk about, is Pixon's storybooks. And what happened is we have 2 young men who were in the church of a friend of mine, and they couldn't read, and so somebody's operating my page, and Tando got very sick and was in hospital, and nobody knew where he was. He was just in hospital, and he was moved, and he lived in a group home, but he's was a patient of the state. And by the time my friends actually found him, he was just so distressed, and he was beyond distressed. And they just thought, they said to him, Tando, if we read to you from the Bible, would that help? And he was so happy. And they read to him, from the Bible, and he calmed down, and they promised to come back the next day. And then they asked me, would I help them to learn to read the Bible? So I said, well, I'm very happy to help you with this, but I'm not going to be able to do it. So, but if they want to take it on, they can. And so what I did was I created from, I'm just going to show you here, I created a picture book with the pictures, so they could read stories from the Bible. So it would be, now I knew that they weren't reading the text, they were reading for meaning, but from the pictures. So it would be like, say, one special baby. So it was like sort of Jesus was God's son. And so we had stories from the New Testament, from the Old Testament, and they absolutely enjoyed it. And they could then, on their own, just take out their own little Bible story, and from the pictures they could read. And then we start just introducing them to some letters. And the message that we got back from Dionette, who was, some of you may know her, from Durban, was they did well with the matching and the building their own sentences with help. Retention is not always that good, but enjoyment is outstanding. And we didn't get permission to show from from the social worker to show them, but I just wanted to show you the biggest smile you had ever seen. That they were just so delighted. You can see here they're now matching the cutout pictures with the pictures in their own Bible. And those were just basically, the three people, and it is float. My time is up. And I'm going to say thank you very much to everybody who has attended. But I am here to answer questions. I know 4 o'clock was our cutoff time, and it is 4:01.